They think I'm too old to notice, too weak to fight back. But they forgot who built this family with bare hands and sleepless nights. Last night, my 8-year-old granddaughter whispered, "Grandma, Mommy and Daddy are planning something bad with your money." I smiled, kissed her forehead, and told her not to worry. But inside me, the storm began to rise. After a lifetime of sacrifice, I was about to be pushed aside like a worn-out coat. What they didn't know is, I've been preparing for this day. I've buried secrets in freezers, memorized account numbers, and made friends in the most unexpected places. I may walk slower now, but my mind is sharpest than ever. They thought they had a plan, but they walked into mine. And when this ends, they'll learn. Quiet storms leave the deepest scars. When I was 23, I gave up my position at a promising accounting firm in Nashville to become a full-time mother. I remember the day I walked into my boss's office, resignation letter in hand, and watched his brows knit with confusion. "You're one of our brightest, Margaret," he said. "Are you sure?" I was. Rachel had just turned 2, and Tom was finishing up his last semester at culinary school. Someone had to keep the wheels turning, and I've always believed a strong family starts with sacrifice. For the next 4 decades, I poured myself into the people I loved. I cooked, cleaned, balanced checkbooks, nursed flu fevers, and stitched Halloween costumes by candlelight. When Tom lost his first restaurant job, it was me who cashed out part of my 401k to help them stay afloat. When Rachel struggled with postpartum anxiety after Emily was born, I moved into their guest room for 6 months, sleeping on a pull-out couch just to make sure someone was there to hold the baby at 2 a.m. Back then, it didn't feel like giving. It felt like living. Love isn't measured in grand gestures, but in the quiet, invisible acts that no one claps for. I never needed applause. Seeing Rachel smile again after months of sadness, watching Tom's pride when his second restaurant finally broke even, those were enough. 3 years ago, after my husband George passed away, I sold our lake cabin and funneled the proceeds straight into Rachel and Tom's new business venture, a cafe and wine bar in a gentrifying part of town, the Violet Hour. The name was Rachel's idea, poetic and refined, just like she fancied herself. I handed over $150,000 without blinking, assuring them it was George's dream to see them succeed. That part was true. The rest, my financial cushion, my plans for travel, even my home repairs, I quietly shelved. Who needs a new roof when your daughter's dream is coming true? But dreams are fickle things. 2 months after the grand opening, they stopped inviting me to weekend tastings. "It's mostly younger crowds, Mom," Rachel said once, waving her hand vaguely. "We don't want you to feel out of place." Tom, always more tactful, sent a bottle of wine home every few weeks with a post-it note. "Thanks again, Mom. Couldn't have done it without you." I kept them all in a drawer beside the stove. Over time, even Sunday dinners became sparse. Rachel was too tired. Tom was working late. Emily still called me after school sometimes, usually to tell me about a new project or a scraped knee. Those calls were my lifeline. She still saw me as something solid, something pin. But even she started saying things like, "Mommy says you worry too much," or "Daddy said you need more hobbies." I told myself not to take it personally. Young families are busy. They need space. Still, something inside me sank a little lower each time I saw my phone light up, and it wasn't Rachel. Or worse, when it was her, but only to ask for something. "Mom, could you transfer a few hundred this week? We're short on payroll." "Mom, do you have Emily's birth certificate? We need it for school enrollment." "Mom, do you still have that old sewing machine? The new curtains don't fit, and I thought maybe..." And I always said yes. Always. Because that's what mothers do. That's what I thought anyway. It wasn't until last fall that I started noticing the pattern. When the heat went out in my house and I mentioned it to Rachel, she said, "Oh, Mom, maybe it's time you moved into one of those nice communities, with the meal plans and transportation and all that." Her tone was casual, but her eyes weren't. Then Tom brought up something during Thanksgiving, between bites of stuffing, no less. "You know, Margie," he said, He only calls me that when he's trying to sell something. If you ever feel overwhelmed managing the house alone, I'd be happy to look into options for managing your bills. Make sure you're covered, just in case. I laughed it off at the time, but later that night, in the quiet of my bedroom, I replayed their words, the suggestion, the subtle push. I didn't want to believe it. These were the people I'd given my life to. Surely I was imagining things, right? But then came the day Rachel asked if I still had the deed to the house. "It's just easier if we keep it on file," she said. I handed it over, and only later did I realize I never got it back. That night, I stood in my kitchen looking at the magnet that held Emily's last drawing on my refrigerator, a picture of me, holding her hand in front of a house. "Me and Grandma," it said in rainbow letters. I traced the little stick figures with my finger and tried to swallow the lump forming in my throat. It wasn't just about the house or the money. It was about the feeling, unmistakable now, that I had become a burden, that all the giving I'd done had turned me into someone disposable. And that's when the shift happened. The warmth that had carried me through decades of sacrifice cooled into something quieter, sharper. Not anger, not yet, just awareness. And awareness, I've learned, is the first step to defense. I started the letter last Tuesday morning. Not because I was dying, though if you'd read the first paragraph, you might have assumed that. "To my family, P," I wrote, "if you're reading this, it means I've decided to let go, not of life, but of expectations." That opening sentence took me half an hour. I kept erasing and rewriting it, not because the words were hard, but because the truth behind them was, I wasn't preparing for death. I was preparing for distance, the kind of distance that builds silently between people when love becomes obligation and respect turns into quiet dismissal. I folded the page and set it on the kitchen counter beside my tea. Outside, the morning light stretched across the yard, warming the patch of garden where George and I used to grow roses. They hadn't bloomed in 2 years. Like most things, they'd been neglected while I prioritized others. I walked to the freezer, not for food, but for comfort. Inside, buried beneath the bags of frozen peas and carefully labeled soups, was a small tin box, sealed with duct tape and tucked behind the ice packs. Emily was the only one who knew about it. 2 years ago, we'd watched a documentary together about emergency preparedness. She'd asked, "Grandma, what do you keep safe in case the world ends?" I told her, half joking, probably some gold, a flashlight, and cookies. She'd laughed, but I'd shown her anyway, opening the tin to reveal 5 gold coins wrapped in cloth, a tiny ledger, and 2 thumb drives. "This is our secret," I'd whispered, and she'd nodded solemnly. Emily could keep a secret like no one else. Back then, I thought it was just a quirky way to teach her about responsibility. Now, I realized it might be the smartest decision I'd made in years. I never told Rachel. Not because I didn't trust her once, but because she'd always treated money like a river, something to be redirected toward whatever felt urgent in the moment. Tom wasn't any better. He believed in luck and loans and very little else. But Rachel had promised me something once. It was after George's funeral when we sat at the dining table going through old insurance papers. My eyes were swollen and hers weren't much better. She took my hand and said, "Mom, I know you're worried, but I'd never touch your money. Never. That's yours, for your peace of mind." She'd meant it, or at least she thought she did. Lately, though, that promise had begun to erode. "Have you thought about your long-term care plan, Mom?" She asked 2 weeks ago, her voice as casual as if discussing laundry. "Some of those assisted living places have waiting lists. It's just good to plan ahead." Tom chimed in, "And healthcare's not getting cheaper, Margie. We should start talking about managing assets efficiently." I smiled and nodded, playing the polite parent, but something twisted in my gut. Last Sunday, she dropped by with a folder labeled Resources. She sat at my kitchen table, flipping through pamphlets for facilities with names like Willow Haven and Sunrise Ridge. Each brochure featured smiling seniors playing bingo or walking through flower gardens. "There's a place on Maple that even lets pets come along," she said, tapping a page. "You wouldn't have to cook or fix anything ever again." I stirred my tea and said nothing. The conversation moved on to Emily's schoolwork and Tom's new wine supplier, but the weight of that suggestion lingered. That night, I couldn't sleep. I went into the kitchen and reopened the letter. I added a new line. I used to think sacrifice guaranteed safety, that giving enough would mean being held close. I was wrong. It wasn't a dramatic realization, just a quiet click of clarity. I wasn't being included in conversations anymore. I was being managed, positioned, softly maneuvered out of my own life, like an old vase being moved to a less visible shelf. The irony was, I wasn't even angry. I was disappointed in them, yes, but mostly in myself, for thinking I could give endlessly and never become invisible. And yet, I still hoped. Yesterday, Emily called just to tell me about a stray kitten she saw near school. It had one blue eye and one green, she said, her voice alight with wonder. If I ever get a pet, can I name it Marbles? It was a silly moment, but it lifted something in me. There, in her small voice, was the same trust I once saw in Rachel's eyes. A chance, however faint, that things could still be rebuilt. That maybe I wasn't entirely erased yet. So I folded the letter again and slid it under the drawer liner in the kitchen. Not a goodbye, not yet, but a bookmark, a placeholder for a future I wasn't sure I'd be invited into. The roses might not bloom this year, but the roots were still there. The phone rang on a breezy Thursday afternoon as I was pruning what remained of my hydrangeas. Emily's name lit up the screen, and a small smile crept across my face. She rarely called during school hours. "Grandma," she said breathlessly, "Mom said I could invite you to my party early, like before everyone else comes." I leaned against the porch rail. "That sounds wonderful, sweetheart. Is there a reason you need me early?" "Well," she hesitated, "there's this thing Mommy wants you to sign. She said it's just boring adult stuff, but I told her I'd ask nicely." She giggled. "So please?" That smile faltered for just a moment. "What kind of boring adult stuff?" "I don't know, just papers. I think it's for planning. Daddy said it's to help with, future things. Anyway, I just want you there early. I have a surprise." A pause stretched between us. I pressed 2 fingers to my temple, as if the pressure would wring clarity from thin air. "I'll be there at 1, I said carefully. "Tell your parents I'll bring the chocolate tart you like." When I hung up, my hands were trembling just enough that I had to sit. The phrase kept looping in my mind, just boring adult stuff, and Emily mentioning it as if she was coached. I knew that tone. It was the same one Rachel used when trying to get George to donate to her college fund. Sweet, manipulative, rehearsed. I went inside, set down my gardening gloves, and sat at the kitchen table. The more I thought about it, the more it connected, like a string of Christmas lights flickering on one by one. Tom had asked for help twice last month. The first was for a minor issue with the cafe's espresso machine. The second was to cover surprise inspection fines. Each time he'd promised to pay me back the following week. That was 6 weeks ago. And Rachel, it wasn't just her resources folder or the brochures for assisted living. It was the tone of finality she used, the faintest suggestion that my decisions were no longer entirely my own. Just last weekend, while Emily was in the other room, Rachel had leaned over and said, "Mom, you should really consider putting some things in order, just so we know how to help you when the time comes." When the time comes. What time? That night, I couldn't sleep. Something kept tapping in the back of my mind like a moth against glass. I went into the study, opened the drawer where I kept family documents, and pulled out an old notebook Emily had left on my desk the last time she visited. It was one of those all-about-me school journals, filled with drawings, misspelled sentences, and sticker stars. I flipped through it absent-mindedly until I found the page titled, "What I Hear My Parents Say When They Think I'm Sleeping." The crayon handwriting wobbled across the page. Mom says Grandma is getting too forgetty. Dad says they should have the lawyer talk to Grandma soon. Mom said if Grandma signs the paper, it will all be easier. They said I shouldn't ask questions. The breath left my lungs as if someone had pulled it from me with string. I reread it twice, then a third time, hoping it would change. But it didn't. I put the notebook down gently and stared out the window. A car passed slowly on the road, headlights off, fading into dusk. Inside me, something hardened. A line I hadn't known existed had been crossed. They were planning something, and whatever it was, it involved signing papers. I returned to the kitchen, opened the lowest cabinet, and pulled out the folder Rachel had left 2 weeks ago. Inside, nestled between cheerful pamphlets and a printed checklist titled Steps for Elder Transition, was a thin manila envelope I hadn't noticed before. I opened it. Legalese spilled out, phrases like durable power of attorney, authorization of medical decision-making, and property management rights. The document had blanks where my name would be filled in. It wasn't signed. Not yet. But everything else was ready. I sat back, the walls suddenly too close. Rachel had framed it all under the guise of help, of care. But this wasn't about helping. This was about control. I returned the documents, slid the folder back where I found it, and stood quietly in the dim light. Then I walked to the freezer. The tin box was still there. I ran my fingers over the duct tape seal. The metal chilled even through my skin. Those 5 gold coins weren't worth millions, but they were untouched. Untouched by promises. Untouched by guilt. And more importantly, unknown to anyone but Emily. I pulled the small ledger from beneath the box and flipped to the last page. Then I added a line in careful handwriting. If they try to take what I've built, I will remind them who built it. Then I opened a fresh page and began planning. I would go to the party, I would bring the chocolate tart, I would smile and kiss cheeks and admire decorations. And when the time came for signing, whatever they intended, I would play the game. But not their version, mine. And they wouldn't see it coming. I arrived at Rachel's house at 1:02 p.m. sharp, chocolate tart in hand, and the carefully practiced smile of a woman pretending not to see the fire behind the curtains. Emily opened the door, eyes wide with glee. "Grandma, you came early," she exclaimed, pulling me in before I could even take off my coat. I kissed her forehead and whispered, "Of course, I wouldn't miss your big day." Inside, the house was a flurry of last-minute decorations and suspiciously staged warmth. Rachel was in the kitchen, rearranging hors d'oeuvres that didn't need rearranging. Tom hovered nearby with a beer already in hand, though the party wouldn't start for another hour. "Mom," Rachel said, overly cheerful, "you remember Claire, right?" Standing near the fireplace was a woman I had never seen in my life, dressed in a pantsuit too stiff for a child's birthday and holding a tablet like it was a clipboard. Her smile was wide, practiced. "Oh yes," Rachel added. "Claire's in real estate. She just happened to be in the neighborhood and stopped by to say hi." I raised an eyebrow. "How fortunate." Claire stepped forward. "Lovely home you have here, Margaret. Charming layout, great bones. I love these original moldings. Must be worth quite a bit these days." My smile stayed fixed, though my fingers curled ever so slightly around the tart box. "Funny," I said. "No one's mentioned selling." Claire blinked, thrown for just a beat. "Oh, of course. I was just admiring the craftsmanship. Homes like this don't come up often anymore." Rachel interjected quickly. "We were just talking hypothetically, Mom. You've said yourself the upkeep's getting harder. It's not a bad idea to know your options." I placed the tart on the counter and looked her square in the eye. "I'm not looking for options. I'm looking to enjoy my granddaughter's birthday." Rachel's mouth opened, then shut again. Tom cleared his throat. "Speaking of which, I printed those forms. You know, the ones we mentioned, about planning ahead. Just a few things to sign so everything's squared away just in case of emergencies." "Right," I said, "just in case." He handed me a folder, thick with highlighted lines and sticky notes. I didn't even look inside. Not yet. "I'll review them at home," I said simply. "Legal documents deserve a quiet mind." Tom looked disappointed but didn't argue. Rachel forced a smile. "That's totally fine, Mom. We just wanted to make sure everything was streamlined." Streamlined. A word for factory floors and shipping logistics, not family. The rest of the party unfolded like a play everyone had rehearsed, but no one believed. Streamers hung perfectly. The cake was shaped like a unicorn. Emily, sweet Emily, moved through it all like she was caught between two worlds. She stayed close to me, leaning in with little updates. Who gave her what, which game she wanted to play. At one point, she tugged on my sleeve and whispered, "There's a surprise in my room. I made you something." Upstairs on her dresser was a notebook. Purple cover, glittery letters spelling my secrets. It was probably just meant to be for fun, the kind of private diary every child keeps and forgets. But it was open, as if waiting for me. The page read, "Mommy said Grandma forgets things all the time now. Daddy said that if Grandma gets worse, they can help the bank and get her house too. But I don't want Grandma to leave. She's the only one who listens when I talk." I sat on the edge of her bed and stared at those words. No spin, no lawyer's phrasing. Just a child, repeating what she'd heard when no one thought she was listening. I ran my fingers down the page, tears stinging my eyes, but not from sadness. It was rage now, clear, cold, focused rage. They weren't just planning to manipulate me, they were preparing to erase me. Downstairs, I was quieter, smiled less, observed more. Later, after the guests left and Emily was in the backyard with her friends, Tom offered me a refill on wine. I declined and excused myself to the restroom, but instead of going there, I walked down the hall and into Rachel's small home office. A laptop sat open, screen still glowing. I shouldn't have, but I did. On the desk, a manila envelope, my name written in Sharpie on the front. I opened it. Inside were copies of financial records, my records, retirement account statements, my mortgage deed, even copies of my ID and social security card, and then another document clipped neatly, a co-signed loan application from 6 months ago for $75,000. Lender, First Community Bank, primary borrower Thomas Reed, co-signer Margaret Hughes, signature forged. My hands began to shake. I examined the signature, the fake loop of my name that looked just wrong enough to make my stomach drop. He used me, without my knowledge, without permission, and the loan had already been approved. I took photos of every page with my phone, heart hammering in my chest. As I replaced everything exactly where it was, I caught a glimpse of myself in the hallway mirror. I didn't see a fragile old woman. I saw a storm waiting to break. They thought they'd planned for every detail. They thought I was tired, naive, too sentimental to fight back. But what they didn't count on, what they never learned in all those years, is that I've been underestimated before, and I've always survived. Now, I wouldn't just survive. I would dismantle. The front yard was filled with balloons, plastic folding chairs, and the scent of store-bought cupcakes. I parked at the curb and sat in the car for a moment, watching the scene unfold through the windshield. Everything looked perfect, picturesque, almost cinematic, but I'd already seen the script. I stepped out, careful not to let the heaviness in my chest show. I was here for Emily, only for her. Rachel greeted me at the front door like a politician meeting donors, her smile bright, eyes scanning for reactions. "Mom, you look wonderful," she said, wrapping me in an embrace just a second too long. "Emily's been counting down the minutes." "She told me," I said, kissing her cheek lightly. "I brought the card and the necklace she admired last spring." Rachel gasped dramatically. "Oh, she's going to love that." In the living room, Tom was already entertaining a few guests. Parents from Emily's school, people I barely recognized. He spotted me and called out with theatrical warmth, "There she is, the woman of the hour. Everyone, meet my mother-in-law, Margaret. She's been like a second mother to me, and now she's also someone we're helping through her golden years." Golden years. It landed like a slap dressed in velvet. Several heads turned toward me, eyes softening into the kind of pity reserved for people recovering from strokes or forgetting birthdays. I smiled tightly, forcing my jaw not to clench. "I still make my own coffee and climb stairs just fine," I said lightly. A few chuckles followed, but Tom's expression didn't change. The message had been delivered. Emily found me near the kitchen. She hugged me so tightly I nearly forgot everything else. "I missed you," she whispered. "There's too many people." "You're the bravest girl I know," I whispered back. "Let's find your gift." We went to the gift table, where I handed her a small velvet box. She opened it, eyes wide. "It's the one from the shop window," she squealed, "with the little emerald heart." Her excitement wrapped around my heart like warm hands, but behind her, I saw Rachel watching us, too closely, like a director assessing a scene. After cake and games, Tom asked everyone to gather in the living room for a little toast. He stood beside Rachel, holding a glass of red wine like it was a microphone. "We just want to thank you all for being here today," he began, "and especially thank Margaret, who's been so generous with her time and resources." He raised his glass toward me. "She's made some decisions recently, important ones for the future, and we're grateful she trusts us to help guide her through them." Applause, murmured approval. I sat still, stunned for a split second. What decisions? Then Rachel appeared at my side, paper in hand, pen clipped neatly to the corner. "It's just a small confirmation," she murmured, "that we're moving forward with the caregiving plan. We can sign it now or later if you prefer." I took the paper, eyes scanning the header. It was exactly what I feared. Permission for financial management, housing transitions, and wellness monitoring. A contract in all but name. There was even a section for signatures dated today. I smiled and handed it back. "Let me read it tonight. I don't sign anything without reading every word. George taught me that." Rachel hesitated, but her smile held. "Of course, Mom. Of course." Later, while the guests were distracted with party games, I stepped into the hallway near Rachel's bedroom to retrieve my coat. Her phone was on the dresser, screen glowing with a new text. I shouldn't have looked, but I did. The message read, "She didn't sign. You said she would fold if we made it public." Another came in seconds later. "Don't worry, Emily will convince her. She always listens to her." I set the phone down and leaned against the wall to steady my breath. My legs trembled. Not from age, but fury. When I returned to the living room, Emily stood beside Rachel, holding a clipboard. "Mom said I should help you fill this out, Grandma," she said brightly. The paper in her hand was a copy of the same document, my name already printed. A pen tucked into her hair like a prop. My heart cracked, not because Emily meant harm, but because they had used her, my Emily, as a pawn. I knelt beside her. "Sweetheart," I said softly, "you don't have to help me with grown-up papers, okay? Let's go get some lemonade." She nodded, confused but obedient. As we walked to the kitchen, I looked back and caught Rachel's expression. Not guilt, just control. But this game, this performance, it wasn't theirs anymore. It was mine now. The living room buzzed with polite laughter as Emily began opening her gifts. Wrapping paper flew like confetti. Rachel clapped a little too enthusiastically at every box unwrapped. Tom hovered nearby with his phone out, pretending to film, though his camera often pointed not at Emily, but at me. I excused myself to the kitchen, needing air and distance. As I stepped inside, I noticed something odd on the far counter. Underneath a tray of untouched quiches was a manila folder, just barely visible beneath a red napkin. Curiosity, or maybe instinct, pulled me toward it. I lifted the napkin. The folder was labeled POA Transfer MH. I froze. POA, Power of Attorney, my initials. With shaky hands, I opened it. The top document read, "Full Financial Transfer and Medical Authority Assignment." Every line was pre-filled, my name, my address, my bank account information. The only blank space? A signature line for Margaret Hughes. They'd prepared it in advance, with a notary page already attached. A contract, for my own erasure. I closed the folder, heart pounding, and that's when Rachel's phone buzzed on the kitchen island. She'd left it unlocked. I didn't mean to see it, but my eyes caught the message on the preview screen. From Tom. "Mom will sign as long as I mention the headaches and confusion. I'm playing the soft side." Translation. "She'll sign as long as you mention the headaches and confusion." Play it gentle. My knees nearly gave out. They were scripting it. The manipulation, the gaslighting, every word rehearsed. I had become a character in their strategy, no longer a mother or grandmother, just a variable to be managed, a formality to get through. I left the kitchen silently, but the noise inside me was deafening. Back in the hallway, I passed the bathroom, and the door opened slightly from the inside. Emily, her face pale, her eyes wide and worried. "Grandma," she whispered. "Come here, quick." She pulled me inside the tiny downstairs bathroom and locked the door. I knelt beside her, suddenly aware of how frightened she looked. Her hands trembled as she clutched the hem of my cardigan. "I heard Mommy talking to Daddy. She said tonight they'll have you sign the contract, and then a doctor will come this week to check your memory." My blood ran cold. What kind of doctor? I don't know, but Mommy said that if you don't sign, they'll say you're already forgetting stuff anyway, that you're confused. I stared at her, trying to keep my voice steady. "Did they tell you to say anything to me?" Emily looked down. "Mommy said I should remind you about the headaches and say you forgot things, but I didn't want to. I didn't." I pulled her into a hug, her small body shaking in my arms. "You did the right thing," I whispered. "I need you to be brave a little longer. Can you do that for me?" She nodded against my shoulder. "I'm scared." "So am I, sweetheart. But sometimes being scared means you're about to do something strong." We left the bathroom together, smiling as if we'd simply fixed a hair ribbon or washed our hands. The performance resumed. Rachel passed me a glass of wine. Tom ushered guests toward the backyard for cupcakes and photos. But in my head, I was laying bricks, quietly, carefully, for a wall that would keep them out for good. They thought they'd created the perfect illusion. Family warmth, generational harmony. But every detail was too crisp, too controlled. Even the way Rachel leaned in and said, "How's your head, Mom? You've seemed off lately." I smiled, the kind that doesn't touch the eyes. "Oh, you know me. I've always been a bit forgetful." Tom laughed too quickly. "Nothing serious, of course, but it's good we're planning ahead. These days, doctors want everything on paper." I nodded. "Of course. That's why I've started making my own notes." And I had. Pages of them. Tonight I would go home. I'd gather every piece of evidence, every message I'd copied, every document I'd photographed. And in the morning, I would call someone Rachel never expected. Someone who had helped George and me protect our assets for decades. A lawyer. And after that, I would call James Miller at the bank. If they wanted to play legal games, I'd introduce them to real legal defense. Because they didn't just cross a line. They painted it in red and marched over it. And now, it was my turn. I didn't sleep that night. Not out of fear, but from the precision of planning. Every minute between midnight and dawn was measured, recorded, and committed to memory like the blueprints of a house I had built with my bare hands. At 7:02 a.m., sharp, I brewed a pot of black coffee, the way George used to like it, and pulled out my old Rolodex. My hands didn't shake. My thoughts were crystal clear. First call, Elaine Booker, a state attorney and longtime friend. She had managed George's will and the land deeds when we bought the cabin upstate. Sharp, discreet, and ruthless when necessary. She answered after 2 rings. "Margaret, what a surprise." "I need to create a trust," I said simply. "Effective immediately for Emily." Elaine didn't hesitate. "I'll be there by 10. Bring all your paperwork, birth certificates, bank info, titles, anything you don't want falling into the wrong hands." Second call, Walter Briggs, notary public, retired firefighter turned community witness for hire. Honest as they come, and strong enough to lift a grown man if needed. Third call, Gail Morris, my neighbor 2 houses down. She'd witnessed my wedding, my daughter's birth, and my resilience after George's death. Loyal, no nonsense. "Gail," I said, "would you be willing to serve as a witness to a legal matter this afternoon? Tell me when and where, honey." By 10:15 a.m., my dining room had transformed into a legal war room. Elaine arrived in a tailored suit with a folder thick enough to reshape futures. Gail brought cookies. Walter, ever practical, carried a clipboard and a steel case stamp set. Elaine got to work drafting the trust. a locked fund tied exclusively to Emily's name, inaccessible to anyone else until she turned 25, with conditions to ensure it supported her education and well-being, not her parents' ambitions. "And if Rachel contests this?" I asked. "She won't win," Elaine said, eyes gleaming. "The evidence you've compiled, the texts, the forged loan, the witness statements, we'll make sure this sticks." By 12:45, every signature was notarized. Every document copied, scanned, and stored in encrypted cloud folders. Then came the final piece. I texted Rachel. "I've thought about what you said. Let's meet tonight. I'll sign the papers." She responded in under a minute. "Of course, Tom and I will come over at 7. Want me to bring the notary?" "No need," I replied. "Already arranged." By 6:30 p.m., the table was set, literally and metaphorically. I laid out tea and cookies, just enough to make the scene look grandmotherly and docile. Gail sat in the sunroom, flipping a magazine. Walter waited quietly in the den, stamp pad in hand, and Elaine sat at the head of the table with the trust document open, but covered by a manila folder. At 7:00 p.m. sharp, the doorbell rang. Rachel entered first, her perfume strong and her smile stronger. Tom followed, already holding the papers like a prize. "Mom, this means so much," Rachel gushed. "We're so relieved you're finally ready." "I realized it's time I made things easier," I said, nodding toward the table. "Please, sit." They did. Tom pulled out the contract they'd tried to push during Emily's party. "This just gives us legal ability to act on your behalf, Mom. Standard stuff. Power of attorney, medical authority, a few real estate clarifications, all for your benefit." "How thoughtful," I said. "Do you want to read it again?" Rachel asked. I shook my head. "No, but I do want you to read something." Elaine stood, unfolding the trust documents like a courtroom exhibit. "This," I said, "is a legally binding trust. As of this morning, every asset I own, my home, my savings, even George's bonds, is held in Emily's name under this trust. You have no authority over it." Rachel blinked. "What are you talking about?" Tom leaned forward. "Wait, this isn't what we agreed." "We didn't agree," I interrupted. "You pressured, you manipulated, and you forged." Elaine spoke up. "These documents are witnessed and notarized. If you attempt to interfere, we will take legal action." Rachel's face drained of color. "You can't do this." "Oh, but I already have," I said. "And in case you question my competence," I waved toward the hallway. Walter entered, stamping pad in hand, followed by Gail, arms crossed, and Elaine, holding out copies of the forged loan Tom had filed under my name. "This is illegal," Elaine said firmly. "We've notified the bank. There will be an investigation." Tom's mouth opened, but no words came. Rachel turned to me, her voice shaking. "We're your family." "You treated me like a burden," I said quietly, "like a problem to be solved. But Emily deserves better, and I won't let her learn that love is transactional." They stood, stammered, and finally left in stunned silence. As the door clicked shut, I turned to Elaine. "Will it hold?" "It's bulletproof," she replied, "and beautifully executed." Walter chuckled. "You could have been a detective, Margaret." I smiled. "No, just a grandmother who pays attention." By midday, my trap was complete. Elaine had left, but would remain on standby via phone. Walter and Gail had agreed to come back in the evening, but this time, I added one more name to the list. Deborah Lynn, a friend I hadn't seen in nearly 5 years. We met decades ago, back when she was a junior reporter covering small-town news, and I was chairing the city's Historical Preservation Committee. Now, Deborah was a respected columnist for the local paper, and still sharp as a whip. I called her just after lunch. "Deborah, how would you feel about stopping by my house tonight for some tea and perhaps witnessing a story worth printing?" She didn't even hesitate. "What time?" 7. "Come through the back gate and bring your recorder." At 6:55, my house was arranged like the stage of a play. Fresh tea brewed, the living room lights cast a warm glow, and my old floral couch had never looked more inviting. Walter waited in the sunroom, stamp pad at the ready. Gail positioned herself in the dining nook with a Sudoku book she wasn't solving. Deborah, dressed in casual khakis and a neutral blouse, took a seat in the corner with her voice note app open for background ambiance. She wore a press badge but covered it with a shawl. The bell rang at 7:00 on the dot. Rachel entered first, cheeks pink from anticipation. "Mom, you look so well tonight." Tom followed with a tighter smile. But what caught my eye was the man behind them. He wore a navy blazer, carried a clipboard, and had the sort of thin, polite smile I'd seen in memory clinics when George was first diagnosed. Too smooth, too practiced. "Mom," Rachel said, "this is Dr. Clarence. Just here for a quick consultation, nothing serious." I tilted my head. "Is he the notary?" No, he's just here to check how things are going. Standard when managing elder transitions. Don't be alarmed." I let my smile grow blank. Transitions. Oh, yes, we're always transitioning, aren't we? Deborah's eyes didn't move, but I saw her thumb tap the record icon. Dr. Clarence cleared his throat. "Margaret, do you sometimes feel confused about dates or events?" "Oh, goodness, all the time," I said sweetly. "Just yesterday I put my shoes in the fridge and the butter in the closet. Can you imagine?" Rachel chuckled nervously. She's been saying things like that a lot lately. Tom, trying too hard to stay casual, had pulled out his phone, clearly recording now. I continued, "My memory's like a sieve these days, and I think I still owe someone money for something, but I can't remember who. Silly old me." Rachel smiled tightly. "That's why we thought it best to help her handle a few adult responsibilities." "Of course," Tom added. We brought the documents again. He pulled out the now familiar folder. Just signatures confirming her agreement to delegate decision-making. Nothing binding, just preparation. Rachel handed me a pen, and I took the papers. My hand trembled, visibly. I looked over the pages as if they were ancient texts. I even muttered a bit, flipping between two pages as if I'd forgotten what I was looking for. Then I signed. Rachel exhaled. "Thank you, Mom. Truly." Tom leaned back, visibly relieved. "Shall I fetch the notary?" Rachel asked. "No need," I said, reaching into the side drawer of the credenza. I pulled out a second folder, clean, crisp. Stamped in bold letters, official copy, filed with attorney. "I've already signed everything that matters," I said. Tom blinked. "Wait, what?" "This," I said, waving the papers they brought, "is a photocopy, a blank." Rachel snatched it from the table. "You signed the wrong version?" "No," I said, voice clear. "I never intended to sign yours. I wanted to give you the performance you expected. The confused mother, the forgetful burden. So you'd let your guard down." Tom stood. "What's going on here?" Deborah stepped forward. "This meeting is being observed by press. I've been recording under consent from the homeowner." Dr. Clarence paled. "I was just here as a favor. I didn't know there was press present." Walter stepped out from the sunroom, flipping his official seal onto the table. "The real documents are signed, witnessed, and notarized," I said, "and they state that all of my assets are now under trust for Emily. Only Emily. No one else has access, including her parents. Attempts to challenge that will be met with legal response." Rachel's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping on dry land. Tom's face turned red. "You tricked us." "No," I said softly. "You tried to trap me. I just refused to step into it." Rachel turned to Emily, who had quietly appeared in the doorway. "Sweetheart," Rachel pleaded, "tell Grandma she's making a mistake." Emily looked at me. "Is it true? I'm the only one who can use it?" "Yes," I said, kneeling to meet her eyes. "For your dreams, your future, not for anyone else's convenience." Rachel's eyes flashed. "You're going to regret this." "No," I said, standing tall. "I regret trusting you too long." They left in silence, but their shadows remained long after the door shut behind them. Deborah ended the recording and tucked away her phone. "This," she said, "is going to make one hell of a story." 2 days passed. No phone calls, no knocks on the door, just the soft rhythm of rain on the rooftop, the ticking of the antique clock in the hallway, and Emily's drawing still hanging proudly on the fridge. Then came the knock. Slow, hesitant, not the kind that demanded to be heard, but the kind that asked to be let in. I opened the door. Rachel stood on the porch, mascara streaking down her face like ink bleeding from a broken pen. Her shoulders hunched forward, her arms crossed over her chest. Behind her, Tom stood motionless on the sidewalk, arms folded, eyes vacant. "Mom," Rachel whispered, "please." I said nothing, just stepped aside. She entered like a ghost. Tom didn't follow. She stood in the living room, surrounded by the echo of what we used to be, a family. She turned slowly, her lip trembling. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she said. I folded my hands calmly. "But you meant it to go far enough to ruin me." "No!" She rushed forward. "We were scared. You were always the strong one, the one with plans. Tom's job is unstable, and the restaurant, I funded your restaurant. I know, and we're grateful, but Emily's schooling, the house, the medical insurance, Tom's been under so much pressure and enough." My voice didn't rise, but it cut through her rationalizations like wind through brittle leaves. "You didn't come here to explain. You came because you lost." Rachel's eyes widened. You didn't lose money, you lost access, and now you don't know what to do without me funding your life." She collapsed onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm sorry." I let the silence hold us both. Then I asked the question that had been clawing at my chest for days. "When did I stop being your mother and become your strategy?" Rachel didn't look up. "Was it when I paid for your second mortgage? Or when you told Tom to ask me directly for the emergencies? Was it after Emily was born and you saw how much I'd give her?" Still nothing. Then came the voice I didn't expect, low, tired from the doorway. "It was my idea." Tom had stepped inside without me noticing. He walked forward slowly, looking 10 years older than he had last week. "I saw how much you'd give, and I told Rachel you'd never say no if we wrapped it in family. I'm the one who brought the fake psychiatrist. I'm the one who found the legal templates online. I wrote the first draft of the contract." Rachel looked up, eyes wide with disbelief. "You did what?" she whispered. "You knew," he said, his voice flat. "You just didn't want to know. You knew." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was devastating. I stood tall, feeling no need for vengeance, just clarity. "I'm not going to press charges," I said. "Not for the forgery, not for the attempted fraud. I've documented everything, and I could end you both." Rachel looked up, eyes full of desperate hope. "But I won't." Tom exhaled. Relief flickered across Rachel's face like sunlight behind a cloud. "Because this isn't about punishment," I said. "It's about preservation." They looked confused. I continued, "I'm not doing this to make you pay. I'm doing this to protect the only kindness left in this family, Emily. She deserves better than to be raised by people who think love is measured by signatures and bank accounts." Rachel cried harder. Tom stared at the floor. "You may keep your house," I said. "You may keep your restaurant. I'm not coming after what I gave you, but you will not touch 1 cent of what I've built for Emily. You will not use her to get to me again, and if you try, the law will know." Rachel sobbed into her hands. Tom whispered, "We ruined it." I nodded. "Yes, but that doesn't mean I will." I turned to the window where the rain had softened, the garden still blooming despite the storm. "I'll be pulling back," I said. "I won't be at every party. I won't drop everything for your calls. You'll have to stand on your own 2 feet, like adults." "But Emily," Rachel began. "Will always be welcome in this house," I interrupted, "but not as bait, not as leverage, only as herself." The room fell into a stillness I hadn't felt in years. Not peace, something harder, something more real. Rachel finally stood, wiping her face with trembling hands. She looked older, too. "Can I still call you sometimes?" "You can try," I said softly, "but I won't always answer." Tom didn't say goodbye. He just followed her out, leaving wet footprints on the hardwood floor. When the door closed behind them, I exhaled, not because it was over, but because I had chosen to walk away from the fire without letting it burn me down. I chose to protect the only thing still worth saving. Not revenge, not legacy, just kindness, just Emily. Tom lingered in the doorway long after Rachel had stepped outside. Rain still pattered lightly, casting streaks of gray on the windows, yet the air in the room had turned still and heavy. "I lied earlier," he said suddenly, his voice raw, almost whispering, "when I said it was all my idea." I looked at him, but said nothing. Silence is a mother's most powerful interrogation tool. He swallowed hard. "Rachel, she's the one who started it. She planted the seed. I went along with it because I didn't want to lose her." I turned toward the fireplace, watching the flicker of old embers in the grate. "You forged a contract with my name. You invited a fake psychiatrist, and you recorded me, hoping I'd sound confused enough for court papers. That's not love, Tom. That's fear. And fear never protects love. It poisons it." Tom dropped into the chair like a man who had run out of road. "She said you'd never know, that you were slipping, that it was for Emily. Really, that this was the only way. And you believed her." He shook his head slowly. "No, but I loved her." Just then, the front door burst open. Rachel was back, dripping wet, mascara long gone, hair wild. Her eyes locked on Tom. "You told her?" she hissed. Tom stood. "I told the truth." Her voice rose to a pitch only guilt could reach. "You weak, pathetic man." And then, without warning, Rachel stepped forward and slapped Tom across the face. The crack echoed in the room like a gunshot. For a moment, everything stood still. Tom didn't react. He didn't lift a hand. He didn't shout. He just stared at her. One cheek red, eyes full of something quiet and broken. Rachel's shoulders rose and fell with angry breath. "You ruined everything," she seethed. "No," I said, stepping between them. "You both did. Together." Rachel turned to me, eyes blazing. "After everything I've done for this family." "For this family?" I snapped, suddenly sharper than I'd planned. "Or for yourself?" Rachel faltered. "Emily was never your pawn. I won't let her be a casualty of your ego, not yours, not Tom's." She crossed her arms. "So what now? You cast us out, punish us forever?" "No," I said. "I give you 1 year." They both looked up in surprise. 1 year, I repeated calmly, "to prove who you are, not to me, but to Emily. You want forgiveness? Show her love without conditions. Show her safety without manipulation." Rachel scoffed. "You think a child can judge something like that?" "She already has," I replied, "the night she warned me." Tom closed his eyes. Rachel looked like she might cry again, but I didn't reach for her, not this time. "If either of you tries to use her again," I said softly, "I'll see you in court. But if you show her genuine care, if you grow up and rebuild your lives, there's hope for you yet." Tom nodded slowly. Rachel said nothing. Then I turned away, toward my kitchen, toward my bedroom, toward my suitcase that had been packed since the night after Emily's party. They watched in silence as I wheeled it to the door. "Where are you going?" Tom finally asked. I smiled gently. "To find a place where I can create something that isn't stolen from me." 6 weeks later, I stood on a sun-drenched balcony overlooking a sleepy seaside town called Cedar Hollow. The air here smelled of salt and lavender. The streets were quiet, and the people spoke gently, like every sentence was part of a painting. I rented a cottage, yellow with shutters that creaked and roses that bloomed against the fence like little rebellions. I unpacked slowly, hung Emily's drawing on the fridge, filled the drawers with old brushes and new watercolors. On the second Monday, I pinned a sign to the window of the community hall. "Art for beginners. Seniors welcome. No judgment, just joy." By the end of the week, I had 12 students. Most came for the conversation, not the painting. But that was the point. We laughed more than we drew. We shared stories while mixing colors. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was building again. This time with canvases instead of contracts, with community instead of compromise. Emily called once a week, sometimes to read me the titles of books she liked, sometimes just to say she loved me. Rachel hadn't reached out. Tom sent a letter, handwritten, apologizing again, telling me he'd applied for a job outside the restaurant. He said he was trying. I didn't write back. Not yet. Maybe next year. One afternoon, as the waves hummed softly below, I painted a crooked house with a stick figure family beside it. I labeled them all, not as they were, but as they could be. Every morning in Cedar Hollow began the same way. The rustling of seagulls, the clinking of coffee mugs at the cafe next door, and the delicate scent of salt mixing with rosemary from the neighbor's garden. It was in every sense a slow and healing place. My little art class had doubled since spring. The Tuesday group painted fruit bowls now. Pears that looked like lopsided onions, apples that melted into sunsets. No one cared about realism. We cared about joy. And every Sunday, just as the sky turned pink over the sea, I received a letter. Always handwritten. Always with a purple wax seal she had insisted on buying herself. Emily. Dear Grandma, they always began. I miss your tea that smells like books. I miss how you laugh when I tell terrible jokes. Mommy said she wants me to stop writing until they figure things out, but I just write and hide them until Daddy helps me mail them. He says he's trying. I think he means with her, but I hope he also means with himself. And that girl, barely 10, understood the world better than most adults I'd met in 70 years. Each letter reminded me why I'd done what I did, why I walked away from the wreckage of betrayal instead of letting it bury me. She was the rose still blooming. A full year passed before I saw their faces again. It was a Saturday. The coastal air was thick with sea mist, and I had just finished rinsing brushes in the kitchen when I heard tires crunch on gravel. I looked out the window, and there they were, Rachel, Tom, and Emily. They hadn't called, hadn't written, but here they stood, dressed not in finery or performance, but in simple clothes like pilgrims arriving at an altar. I met them on the porch, apron still smudged with paint. Hi, Grandma, Emily called. Running forward, I caught her in a hug so tight she squeaked. You're taller, I whispered, and wiser, I bet. I brought my sketchbook, she said proudly. Behind her, Rachel shifted uncomfortably. Tom carried a bag. We weren't sure if you'd let us in, Tom said. That depends, I said, voice even, on why you're here. Rachel bit her lip. To say sorry. I raised an eyebrow. For what? She blinked. For trying to control you. For forgetting you're not just mom, but a human being with dignity. For thinking love could be replaced by contracts. I nodded. Good start. Tom cleared his throat. And for putting Emily in the middle of our mistakes. She deserved better. Still does, I said. We sat in the garden. Me on the bench under the fig tree, Emily cross-legged beside the rose bush she'd helped me plant last summer. Rachel and Tom sat opposite me, quiet, uncertain. I've been teaching at the library, Rachel said, reading workshops for kids. I forgot how much I loved it. Tom added, I got a job in a mechanics shop. Honest work, not glamorous, but I sleep better. I studied their faces, not the words, but the shadows behind their eyes. They looked tired, but they also looked real. Not pretending, not performing. Why today? I asked. Rachel looked down at her hands. Because it's been exactly 1 year. We've been to therapy. We've read every letter Emily wrote. We wanted to give you space, but now, we just wanted to show up. Tom handed me the bag. Inside was a canvas, hand-painted, rough, childlike, a crooked house, stick figures labeled with names. Grandma, me, Mommy, Daddy, and in the sky a quote, "Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, it means choosing who's worth remembering." My throat tightened. I didn't come to Cedar Hollow to be found, I said finally. I came here to stop losing myself. Rachel's eyes glistened. But I never stopped loving Emily. And I never stopped hoping you'd remember who you used to be. I don't expect you to forgive us, Rachel whispered, I already did, I replied, the day I chose not to fight you in court. Tom looked stunned. Why? Because Emily deserved at least one adult who chose compassion over punishment. Emily reached into her backpack. Can I show you what I've been drawing? She flipped open her sketchbook. Roses, dozens of them, all different, all blooming. Some people at school said flowers are just for girls, she said, wrinkling her nose, but I told them roses grow thorns, and that makes them strong. I smiled through the tears I didn't wipe away. You're right, I said. The thorns are part of the beauty. As the sun dipped low, painting everything gold, I stood and looked at Rachel and Tom. This isn't a happy ending, I said, but it's a new beginning if you want it. They both nodded, not in relief, but in understanding. Emily took my hand. Grandma, can we paint together again? Yes, sweetheart, I said softly. We have all the colors in the world. 3 days after their visit, I received a letter, not from Emily this time, but from Rachel. Typed, neat, sterile. Dear Mother, thank you for seeing us. I know it meant a lot to Emily. I hope someday you can fully forgive me. I've been going through a tough time since being let go from the library. They said funding cuts, but I know it's more than that. I miss stability. I miss what we had. I miss what you gave us. If you ever reconsider your decisions regarding the estate, I'd be grateful to talk. Love, Rachel. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the drawer where I kept unpaid bills and grocery receipts, things I didn't need to revisit. She had come, not to reconnect, but to reopen a door that had already closed. Her apology had been wrapped in convenience, not contrition. I didn't respond. The following Sunday, the morning fog still wrapped the trees when another knock came, gentler this time. It was Tom. He didn't carry gifts. He didn't ask to come inside. He held only one thing, a well-worn journal with glitter stickers on the cover. Emily asked me to give this to you, he said. I took it with care. Tom hesitated. I won't stay. I thought you should read it. He walked away before I could ask anything more. Inside, the first few pages were filled with crooked doodles and poems that didn't rhyme. Then came something different. Words written with surprising clarity. Sometimes I think I'm older than Mommy and Daddy, not in age, but in knowing what love feels like. Mommy says we do things for family, but sometimes I think she means money. Grandma says love is about showing up even when it's hard. Further down, if I grow up big, I will protect Grandma even if everyone else forgets to. I closed the journal, holding it to my chest like a heartbeat, not because I needed validation, but because it reminded me of something I had nearly forgotten. What I had protected wasn't just Emily's future. It was her ability to love honestly in a world full of manipulation. The next few weeks passed with calm, the kind that doesn't feel like silence, but resolution. I stood at the kitchen counter one evening stirring soup when I looked around at the home I'd made. Plants that didn't match, sketches pinned to the fridge, paint-stained tablecloths, and sunlight always finding its way in. This house had become more than a shelter. It had become a sanctuary, but it didn't need to become a shrine. The lawyer from town, Margaret Knowles, yes, we shared a name, arrived for our scheduled meeting. Her presence was warm, and her shoes always squeaked slightly on hardwood floors. I'm ready to finalize, I said. She opened her folder. Just confirming, your house will be left to Emily Jane Walters, sole heir. But the remainder of your assets, investments, savings, the restaurant shares you want redirected? I nodded. To the community center, specifically to fund lifelong learning programs, art, music, technology for seniors. I want it to keep blooming even when I don't. The lawyer smiled. A beautiful legacy, Margaret. I'm not interested in legacy, I replied. I'm interested in impact. I signed. It felt like planting something that wouldn't bloom for years, but when it did, it would cover the whole town in color. 2 weeks later, I was pulling weeds near the rose bush when I heard a familiar voice. Grandma! Emily ran up the stone path, backpack bouncing. Behind her, no Rachel, no Tom, just her. She threw her arms around me, tighter than ever. I brought my report card, I laughed, brushing soil from my hands. Let me guess, straight A's? She beamed. Except one B, but it was in PE, and I had a cold that week. We sat on the porch as she flipped the pages for me, narrating each grade like a badge of honor. I listened with the pride only a grandmother could know, not for the grades, but for who she'd become. Then she grew quiet. I know you gave me the house, she whispered. Mom doesn't know yet, but Dad said you told the lawyer to keep it quiet until I'm older. I nodded. She looked at the garden, where new blooms were pushing through mulch. Why did you do it? Because a home isn't something you inherit. It's something you earn, and you've loved me without conditions. Emily leaned her head on my shoulder. I didn't do anything special. Yes, I said. You were honest, brave, and kind. She hesitated. Grandma, I told my school counselor everything, about the party, about the papers, about the fake doctor. She said I was strong. You were more than strong, I said. You were the reason I remembered who I am. She was quiet again, then reached into her backpack. I made this in art class. She handed me a folded sheet, watercolor and crayon, a single rose blooming through cracked concrete. At the bottom, in purple ink, she had written, "You taught me how to love the right way." I didn't cry, not because I wasn't moved, but because peace feels too full for tears. We sat there as the sky dimmed and the wind whispered through the rose bush beside us. And I thought, perhaps, this is what redemption really looks like. Not an apology, not a reversal, but a child becoming more than what she came from, a rose still blooming.